Evening, church. Join me in singing Heavenly Sunlight. Walking in
Good evening. A couple of public service announcements before we get started. If you come to church without setting your clock Sunday morning, you're going to be here real early before anybody else gets here. So remember, fall back so you get an extra hour's sleep Saturday night. And also next Tuesday is my favorite day because they will quit running political ads, thank goodness. And then we get a month of health insurance ads because December 7th is your day to change all your health coverage. If it's not one thing they overload you with, it's something else. But don't forget to set your clock Saturday night. If you want to come early, that's fine. You can help make the coffee. The Simon Peter principles. Tonight is lesson 4, but we're looking at principle 5. And I'm looking forward to this one. Principle 5, no substitute for on-the-job training. Y'all don't know what on-the-job training is, right? You've already been hired, you've got the job, but you don't know how to do it. And so your employer trained you in doing the job the way he wants it done. You may think you know how to do the job, but if you're hired to work for an employer, he wants you to do it his way. And there's no substitute that. And since we're talking about Simon Peter, we've already established that he needed a lot of training. So he had it. Subtitle of this might be called, Peter Handles Some Tough Questions. He asks some tough questions, and he answers some. Some he shouldn't even. But on-the-job training, there's no substitute for it. It's the best way to learn a job. We've always heard, tell me something and I'll learn something. Show me and I'll learn a little bit more, but involve me and I'll remember it. If you get involved in doing the job, you remember it. I remember when I first graduated from college and I thought I knew everything. I had a degree in electrical engineering, so I knew everything there was to know about electricity. Wrong. I got my first job after that, and I was highly insulted when the man that I was reporting to assigned me as an electrician's helper. I had a degree in engineering. I knew everything about electricity, and he made a helper. Basically, I carried the tool pouch for one of the older electricians and handed him the tools that he needed. Best thing that company ever did for me. It didn't take me long to find out how uneducated I was about electricity. I knew how to draw any electrical circuit there was out there. I knew how to calculate fault currents. I knew how to do all that. But I had no idea what a size 3 magnetic starter looked like. They don't teach you that in college. I had no idea which overloads fit that starter and how to put them in there. So I carried a tool pouch for a man for several months, 3 months, and that was probably the smartest thing that my boss could have ever done for me. I learned how to do all that, and it paid off because I spent 40 some odd years in that occupation and knew pretty well what I was doing. Mostly I learned how not to electrocute myself, and that's one thing they don't teach you in school. I asked a lot of questions during those months I was working with him, and he asked me a lot of questions. Most of the questions he asked me was not because he wanted me to enlighten him, but he wanted to see if I knew what I was talking about. I gave him the wrong answer a lot of times, but it paid off. Questions. How do you handle tough questions? Have you ever gotten tough questions? Suppose in your job someone asks you a question that you're not quite positive about the answer, but you got a pretty good idea what the answer is. So do you give them that answer, even though you're not sure whether it's the right answer or not? Well, this situation happened to our favorite character, Simon Peter. We know Simon Peter well enough to know that he answered the question, right? It was a question about a task that we all look forward to every year, paying taxes. One of our favorite things that we have to do. Matthew 17, verses 24 through 27. When they had come to Capernaum, those who received the temple tax came to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the temple tax?" Or as we would say it, "Doesn't your teacher pay his taxes?" He said, "Yes." And when he had come into the house, Jesus anticipated him, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes? From their sons or from strangers?" Peter said to him, "From strangers." Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free. Nevertheless, lest we offend them, go to the sea, cast in a hook, and take the fish that comes up first. And when you've opened its mouth, you'll find a piece of money. Take that and give it to them for me and you." You notice Peter didn't even question Jesus this time when he told him how to fish. Remember, Peter was a professional fisherman. He knew how to fish. But Jesus says, "Here's what I want you to do." He didn't even question it. He just went and did it. Temple tax. In Exodus chapter 30, when God was telling Moses how to set up the temple and the procedures that went along with that, they set up a tax. It was, excuse me, it was paid yearly, about a month before Passover, and it was to support those who worked around the temple, taking care of the religious services there. It was the support for the people who worked in the temple. So yes, we need to pay those who work around the church here. Because that's one of the first things God set up in the book of Exodus. If you want to go back and read it, it's in Exodus, the 30th chapter. It amounted to half a shekel per year per person. Not a lot of money. A silver shekel was worth about 60 cents, and a gold shekel was worth about $8. It doesn't say whether it was a silver or a gold shekel, but at the most, $8. What your yearly temple tax was. So it wasn't that much. I've read this story numerous times, and I always had a question. Why did they ask Peter about taxes? Who was the tax expert among the disciples? Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. So why didn't the temple tax people go and ask Matthew about taxes? Just seems kind of strange to me. You're going to ask Peter. Well, I came up with two possibilities. Number one, they wanted to trip him up. They already knew that the tax had not been paid that year, and they were trying to trap him. We know in other instances, the Jewish leaders were constantly trying to trap Jesus with their questions. They always ask questions to try to get him to entrap himself with questions. And in this case, they thought, well, maybe if we can trap one of his disciples, it will put some bad light on him. Maybe that's one reason they went to ask Peter. Second reason they came with is they knew Peter. They're in Capernaum. That's where they lived. They're in their hometown. They know Peter. They know he's going to speak out. He's the man who always speaks up, always has an answer, always has something to say. And if we ask Peter, he's going to give us an answer. And maybe the answer he gives us will give us an in into accusing Jesus of something. But Simon Peter was a little bit smarter than they were. He simply said, yes. He didn't go into any detail. He didn't start an argument. He didn't give them an opening to complain anymore. He just said, yes. And obviously he walked away. A lot of times the simplest answer we can give to a question is just a short answer and walk away. The other thing I noticed in this reading is when Peter came into the house, Jesus already knew what Peter was going to start talking about, didn't he? The scripture says that, and when he came into the house, Jesus anticipated him. Now, there's a whole sermon in there. Jesus knows what you're thinking and what you're asking before you even ask it, doesn't he? But he still tells us to pray, to ask, and to ask things of him. He says, ask in faith and it'll be given to you. Even though he knows what the question is and he knows what the answer is, he still puts it on us. We have to ask. So he asked Peter a question. Before Simon could even start the conversation, Jesus asked him about paying taxes. Basically what Jesus tells him is, I'm the Son of God. I don't have to pay earthly taxes. But lest we offend somebody, we're going to pay our taxes. Jesus lived what he taught. Don't cause offense. Don't be offensive to people. It would offend the tax people if he didn't pay his taxes. So he, lived what he preached. It's pretty obvious from the story that the fish that Peter caught, how much money did it have in its mouth? A shekel. Because whose taxes did it pay? Pay mine and yours. Half a shekel each. So there's going to be a shekel in a fish's mouth. I'd like to catch that fish, wouldn't you? That's got money in his mouth. The subject of taxes comes up several times in Jesus' ministry. In Matthew chapter 22, starting in verse 15, it says, Then the Pharisees went and plotted how they might entangle him in his talk. And they sent to him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, oh, and listen to this, if this is not the most drippy, I'm going to compliment you and make you feel good conversation. Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God in truth, nor do you care about anyone, for you do not regard the person of men. Tell us, therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Can't you just hear the dripping in that? Is there just, I'm going to catch you on this one. The Jews hated the Romans. They were under captivity for the Romans. And they had to pay taxes to the Romans every year. They didn't like that. So they were going to trip Jesus up and they said, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? We're going to catch him on this one. Can't catch Jesus, it says, but he perceived their wickedness. And he said, why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money. So they brought him a denarius. That's a Roman coin, a denarius. And he said to them, whose image and inscription is this? Take a look at the coin. Whose picture's on there? Whose inscription is that? And they said to him, Caesar's. And he said to them, render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way. When he said that, they didn't have a comeback on that one. I mean, they were trying to trip him up with the question, is it lawful to pay taxes? And he says, well, his picture's on it. Give it to him. They didn't have an answer for that, and they walked away. They just Whoops, got me on that one. I'm going to leave. And Paul addresses the same thing in Romans 13. Verses 1 through 7 is the entire thing, but we're going to look at just verse 1 and verse 7. Be subject to the governing authorities. We're supposed to be subject to the government. Render therefore to all their due. Taxes, to whom taxes are due. Custom, to whose customs. Fear, to whom fear. And honor, to whom honor. So, yes, we have to pay our taxes. Being a deadbeat Christian is not a very good testimony for Christ, is it? Our taxes are due. We have to pay it. It's the law. Back to the original question. When you don't know the answer, especially to a religious question, what's the best response? How should we answer if someone asks us a question, especially if it's a religious question and we don't know the answer or we're not sure of it? There is no shame. Go ahead, Adam. Be honest with them. And oh, you got that one just right. See, I asked a question. He had the right answer. There's no shame in saying, I don't know. They ask you a question and say, I don't know. And then what do you add? I'm going to find out the answer and I'm going to get back with you on it. And if you make that promise to somebody, keep that promise. Find out the answer and get back with them. There have been numerous times that I've gone to Rex or Dwight or somebody that I respect around here and ask questions because I don't know the answer to everything. Doesn't that surprise you? You don't know the answer to everything either. Do we ask people for help when we don't know the answer to something? Or are we like Peter and just say, yes? I'm not sure whether yes is the right answer or not, but I gave him an answer. No shame in saying, I don't know. I'm going to get back with you. Plus, if you tell somebody you're going to get back with them, that gives you the opportunity to go back and talk to them again. A second chance to get a discussion with them going. So it works double good for us. So if you don't know the answer, don't be like Peter. Simon had not learned that response yet. He was still ready to always give an answer. But surely he knew that the tax had not been paid, because when Jesus told him to go get a fish and pay our taxes, okay, he knew the tax wasn't paid. Was yes the right answer? Or maybe not yet would have been a better answer. Does your teacher not pay the temple tax? Well, he hadn't paid it yet. But we're going to. And then you ask Jesus, how are we going to pay this tax? Simon Peter still had a lot of growing to do. Questions, you know. When you get a job and you don't know all the answers, ask questions. Listen to the questions people ask you. Our second scenario we're going to look at, Simon Peter asks a tough question. And he gets an even tougher answer for the question that he asks. This happened right after Jesus had been teaching his disciples about humility, seeking the lost, and forgiveness. Always the impulsive one, Simon Peter speaks out and says, I've got a question about forgiveness. But at least he's thinking. He wants to learn. We should all be that way. If somebody's talking to you about forgiveness and I'm not real clear on this subject, I got a question. You know, at least he's thinking. He's asking questions. That's great. But along with the question, he gives him an answer. That's not the way to answer a question with your own answer. Matthew 18, verses 21 and 22. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. When you look at this, Simon Peter was actually being quite generous with his offer of 7 times. What did the Mosaic Law say? The Mosaic Law was the original eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth law. If somebody does something to you, you do it right back to them. That was the Mosaic Law. Mosaic Law doesn't talk about forgiveness. It talks about retribution. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And that's what they were living under at this time. So when Simon says 7 times, boy, he's really being generous. He thinks that's great. Remember the number 7. Some of the more compassionate rabbis even propose 3 times that we can forgive somebody 3 times. That's really more than the law requires. So we're being really good if we forgive somebody 3 times. So when Peter says, should I do it 7 times? He's being really generous. Right answer. Nope, not yet. Jesus says 490 times, or 70 times 7. But let's give Peter the benefit of the doubt here. He's been listening to Jesus long enough to begin to understand what forgiveness is. Jesus talked about forgiveness lots of times. That was one of his main topics. And Simon was proposing more than twice what the liberal rabbis even said. But you know, this had to have been a shock to his disciples when he said, nope, not 7, but 70 times 7. For all of us mathematicians, Jesus is not setting a definite number that we should keep our little tally book, and every time we forgive somebody, we write that down, and when we get to 490, let the hammer fall. Bam! I made my 70. No. That's not what he's saying. Jesus' words have a special significance when we remember the Jews and their opinion of the number 7. The number 7 was a perfect number. They attached a special significance to it. It represented wholeness in every way. Complete, perfect, 7. The earth was created in 6 days and God rested on the 7th. Everything was perfect. It's done. Everything was in 7s. Remember the year of Jubilee and the forgiveness of people, the slaves, every 7 years. Fields even had to lay fallow in the 7th year. 7 was a special number to the Jews. So that's why Peter was using the number 7. And Jesus put it right back at him. Not 7, 70 times 7. 7 times 7 times 10. 10 was also a special number to the Jews. It literally represented infinity, numberless. There's no limit to the number of times that you forgive somebody. So what Peter thought was a good question, tough question. How many times do I forgive him? 7? He gets an even tougher answer. Infinity. Don't count the number of times you forgive somebody. To be truthful, that's an area that I fail in a lot of times, and if you're honest, we probably all do. Sometimes I even fall short of what Peter suggested, 7 times. When someone cheats me or steals from me or lies to me or says something that really upsets me, do I forgive them? Or am I the person who says, well, I'm going to bury the hatchet, but I'm going to leave the handle sticking out. If it ever happens again, I know where that hatchet is. And when you forgive somebody, do you ever trust them again? That's where I fall short. Somebody wronged me. I'm not ever going to let them do that to me again. But Jesus says you infinitely forgive them of this. And when someone wrongs me, I expect them to come to me and ask for forgiveness. Are you the same way? You did me wrong, brother, and I'm not going to forget it. Well, he never said he was sorry. Let's see what Jesus says about that. In the verses just prior to Simon Peter's question about how many times to forgive somebody, Jesus gave the procedure of dealing with a brother's offense. Back to chapter 18 of Matthew, verses 15 through 18. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, he does something against me, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. This is the way Jesus says that we deal with faults or with slights when somebody upsets us. Go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. But if he will not hear you, just you and him alone, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of two or three witnesses every word may be established. So first you go by yourself and you try to talk it over with the person. If he won't listen to you, take maximum of two people with you so that you got three that will hear this conversation. And you try to work it out among the three. But if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. Then you make it public. But if he refuses to hear the church, let him be like a heathen and a tax collector. Here's tax collectors. I wonder what Matthew thought when Jesus was always, casting dispersions on tax collectors as being the worst persons in the world. Matthew stayed as an apostle, so he probably got over it. But that's the procedure that Jesus says that when we've got something against a brother, one-on-one. If he won't listen to you, maximum of three. If you won't listen to them, then tell it to the church. And if you won't listen to the church, we would say we withdraw fellowship from. That's happened in this congregation on times, I'm sorry to say, but it has happened. In this scenario here, who makes the first move? Well, he didn't come to me and ask for forgiveness. That's not what it says. What does Jesus say? Who makes the first move? I do. You do. We make the first move. We go to him and talk to him. Or do we talk to everybody else about it and tell everybody else all the dirty secrets that this? You won't believe what Crafton did to me. Let me tell you all about Crafton. Is that the way we handle it? By the way, he hadn't done anything to me. Right, brother? Okay. But that's the way we handle it a lot of times. I'm going to go tell everybody else about it. That's not what we're supposed to do. That's just throwing gasoline on the fire, making it worse, especially if they're only hearing my side of the story. I may be the one that's totally in error, but now somebody else knows my side of the story and they don't know his. What do we do when somebody starts talking to us about somebody else? Have you ever had that situation? I see some heads going, uh-huh. Somebody comes to me and starts telling me about something that somebody else did. How should we handle that? Do we listen to them and offer comments about what they're saying and say, yeah, I don't like him either. Or, yeah, he did something to me too. No, that's not what you do. Or should we just stop them right there and say, have you been and talked to him about this? And watch him go, huh? And you say, well, I don't want to hear any more about it until you do that. That would surprise a lot of people if we did that. But I'm afraid we don't do that a lot of times. So Peter had started out with just a simple question. How many times should I forgive somebody? And boy, he's getting more than he bargained for in an answer here. It's a tough question, but we need to remember the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples to pray, that a lot of us pray sometime. Matthew chapter 6. Have you ever prayed this prayer? And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And then if you go down to verse 14, it says, for if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. That's a heavy statement. If we don't forgive other people, don't expect God to go back to verse 12 and forget about the rest of it. Forgive us our trespasses. End of story. No. He says, you forgive them and pray that God forgives you just like you treat somebody else. The golden rule. How you'd want to be treated, that's how you treat other people. Right after Jesus had this discussion with Simon Peter and with the rest of the disciples there, he teaches the parable of the unforgiving servant. Remember the servant that owed the master money, and one owed him 10 talents, and the master forgave him the 10 talents, and one owed him 50 talents, and he forgave him. But then the one who owed him 100 talents, the master forgave him of his 100, and what did he do? He turned right around and went back and put somebody in prison that owed him just a few talents. Jesus teaches this parable to him, says, that's not the way we treat people. I'm not going to read this, but that's the end of Matthew chapter 18. Simon Peter asked what he thought was just a simple question, but it opened up a whole deeper discussion, a lot deeper than he had imagined. But Simon Peter is showing spiritual growth now, isn't he? He's starting to ask questions. He's starting to think. He's starting to admit, I don't know everything. So I'm going to ask some questions. He's thinking and asking questions rather than always being the one to open his mouth without thinking. Later in life, Peter wrote a couple of books of the New Testament. And 1 Peter 3:9, he says, do not repay evil for evil, or insult with insult, but with blessings. Because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. Peter learned his lesson before he wrote his books about forgiveness. A tough subject, how we forgive other people. We go to them first, one-on-one. Don't ever be guilty of talking about one of your brothers or sisters. One-on-one. Work it out. Early in the chapter, Jesus talked about his followers eating his flesh and drinking his blood. We studied this, if you were in the 7 I Am class from the book of John. One of the things he said is, I am the bread of life. He's talking about, eating my flesh and drinking my blood. It's a tough subject to talk to non-Christians about even today. And back then, this was truly shocking when he brought this subject up. Early Christians were accused of being cannibalistic by non-believers, and they were also often persecuted because of this teaching. Now, we all understand now that when he's talking about eat my flesh and drink my blood, he's talking about the communion. But at this time, when Jesus is giving this lesson, the Last Supper has not happened yet. Communion has not been established. And he's talking to people about it. It was a shock to everybody who heard this. This is a really tough topic for him to get into. John 6, 66 through 71 is where this happened. From that time, many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. Then Jesus said to the 12, "Do you also want to go away?" Any guess of who's going to answer? But Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we have come to believe and know that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered them, "Did I not choose you, the 12, and one of you is a devil?" He was talking about Judas Iscariot, but he chose Judas Iscariot. All the verse says, he spoke of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, for it was he who would betray him, being one of the 12. For the first time in his ministry, what he said prompted a mass exodus. Multitudes of people had been coming to him to hear what he said, but suddenly he got into this subject, and many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. People were leaving saying, "This is a hard teaching." Jesus turned to the 12 and he asked them, "What about you? Are you going to leave too?" Who else but Simon Peter would immediately speak up with the answer? But this is one of the rare occasions where he said exactly the right thing without messing up and quickly sticking his foot in his mouth. He said the right thing right here and quit talking. And his answer was quite simple. Where else can we go? You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. He says, we have come to believe and know. We know this. Where else can we go? He hit the nail right on the head on this one. Simon fumbled and stumbled a lot of times, but he knew in his heart that he and the others had found the Messiah, and they weren't leaving. Don't overlook the statement Jesus made right at the very last. He says, "I chose you." He chooses us too. We are God's chosen. God even acknowledged that everybody he chose was not perfect. He talked about Simon. He says, "And one of you is the devil, but I chose you." So he acknowledges that everybody's not perfect, that there's still work to be done. There's still some on-the-job training to be done. Jesus had hired these men. They had a job to do, but they still needed to be trained. And how is the training done a lot of time? By asking and hearing questions. A lot of times, don't we just sit here in Sunday service, fat, dumb, and happy, and Rex talks, and the teachers in class talk, and okay, just in one ear, right out the other. We don't ask questions. We don't, question what they say. If he said it, it's got to be true. Right? Wrong. Even Paul, being an apostle and ordained of God to speak the word, had several things to say. And he was talking about the Christians at Berea in Acts 17, he said, "These were more fair-minded than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness and searched the Scriptures daily to find out whether these things were so." How many times do we go home from church on Sunday and say, "I remember this being said in class. Let me get the Bible out and see if I can find that." Do we search the Scriptures? Do we read it every day? Is that a part of our daily routine? He says they were more fair-minded. The King James says they were more noble than the Thessalonians. They searched the Scriptures how often? Daily. Every day they're looking through the Scriptures. Maybe we need to ask more questions and not just take everything for fact that we hear. So, we need to ask more questions. We need to listen to more questions from other people. Find somebody that you trust, that you think might have the right answer. Ask them a question sometime. You get to know them better, you get to know yourself better. Study your Bible more and keep learning. On-the-job training never ends. I was in the electrical business for 40-some-odd years. The day I left, I was still learning things about that business. I still don't know it all. I've been in the church all my life. There's still things I don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know. But I'm trying to and ask questions. Let's all be that way. We're on the job. Let's get trained. Next time, while we're getting trained with our own job training, pay attention to the details, to the little details. A lot of small things that we can learn if we pay attention to it. Anybody have any comments? I'll see you next week.